welcome to Think Like Topper's daily news analysis of the Hindu newspaper. So, in this video, let's keep it short since we are not getting deep into each article. Since I'm recording this video in the night 9 p.m., it's almost time. So, let's just skim through the articles briefly. So, we all know that there was a flight which was stranded in France due to allegations of human trafficking recently, and that flight contained most of the Indian passengers who are from Punjab, Haryana, and Gujarat. That flight was cleared to fly to India after 4 days. So, after landing, CBI officials have interrogated the passengers. So, this news is quite important because this is a very good example for betterment of India France relation. So, if India France relation were not good, so the clearance could have been delayed since our relation has been elevated drastically in recent years, and we also commemorated 25 years of our strategic partnership. And France has also valued India as a strategic partner in defense sector or intelligence sharing in peace process, Indo-Pacific policies, etc. So this is a quite good example for betterment of India and France relation. And coming to the second article, which deals with India's fiscal deficit, which may breach 5.9% of the GDP target. That means the fiscal deficit is going to widen in the coming months. So India's fiscal deficit may breach 5.9% of the GDP target, which could hit 6.6% through tax collections and buoyant and may offset a wide shortfall in disinvestment outcomes. So due to likelihood of revenue spending exceeding the budget estimates by 2 lakh crore. So India Ratings and Research said so. It has indicated that since the borrowings have increased, there is a increase in fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit's formula is very simple: when the revenue minus expenditure turns out to be negative. That means when revenue decreases and expenditures increases. Narrowing trade deficit cuts India's CAD to 1% of the GDP in Q2. Service exports grew by 4.2% year-on-year basis, back on rising exports of software, business, and travel services. Net service receipts increased both sequentially and year-on-year basis, according to the latest data published by RBI. India's current account deficit declined to $8.3 billion, which is of 1% of country's GDP in the second quarter of the financial year 2024. Narrowing of the merchandise trade deficits. This is due to narrowing down of the merchandise trade deficit as per RBI's latest data. So, remittance rise. The private transfer receipts, mainly the remittances by the Indians employed overseas, amounted to $28.1 billion, which is an increase of 2.6% from their levels during the corresponding period year ago. In the financial account, net FDI witnessed an outflow of $0.3 billion as against to $6.2 billion in Q2 of previous financial year. The foreign portfolio investments recorded net flow of $4.9 billion, which is lower than $6.5 billion during Q2 of financial year 2023. So here we need to know the terms: foreign direct investment, foreign portfolio investors, and foreign institutional investors. The key definitions of these three terminologies are very important from the prelims perspective. So, usually in India, FDI is said when the investment by a foreign investor exceeds 10% in any of the entities based in India, that is FDI. If the investment amount is less than 10%, this amounts to be foreign portfolio investors. So, foreign institutional investors are those who are the investors who are already institutionalized. For example, if a XYZ institution, like say XYZ insurance company, is investing in Indian markets, they are called the institutional investors who are amounting to less than 10% of the total investments of the value of an entity in India. Further, recently India's foreign minister has been on the tour to Moscow. Since the India Russia heads of the states annual meeting is not taking place since 2 years due to the outbreak of Russia Ukraine war, Indian foreign minister has been on the tour for the betterment of the bilateral relations between India and Russia. So India and Russia in key pacts related to the Kudankulam nuclear plant. Kudankulam nuclear plant is coming up in Tamil Nadu. So on this Kudankulam nuclear plant has been steadily operating and its design capacity is of 1000 megawatt, and the plant is expected to start operation at full capacity by 2027 according to Russian state. And this particular nuclear plant is setting up with the aid of Russia. So this is a very good example between India and Russia's strategic partnership. So it is a major boost to the time-tested partnership. India and Russia on Tuesday they signed some very important agreements related to construction of the future power generated Kudankulam power plant. So as of now, only that update has been given in the Hindu. So further, the foreign minister noted the significant progress in trade, finance, connectivity, energy, civil aviation, nuclear domains, and they appreciated the greater focus on exploring new opportunities, discussed making our cooperation more balanced, sustainable in different dimensions. So, despite Russia Ukraine war and India's more leaning towards Russia, India has maintained a neutral stance in Russia Ukraine war, being it uh, voting at the UNSC resolutions for a ceasefire. India has continuously abstained from voting against Russia or in favor of Russia, and this has had also been applauded by the Russian President Vladimir Putin for India's independent foreign policy rather than being a Western ally. Further, we have an article with regard to the deep fake issues which had been in the news recently when deep fake video of an actress was circulated in the internet. So ministry had sent social media firms an advisory to regulate these deep fakes which are really a menace recently using the AI tools. And this advisory aimed at getting social media firms to crack down more forcefully on the fabricated deepfake clips. So these deepfakes are usually targeted to famous personalities like actors, actresses, or political figures, or any of the activists, especially who have more appealing in the public domain. So, for example, during the 2020 presidential election, there was a deep fake circulated against Barack Obama, where he was observed criticizing Donald Trump in a very mean language. So, such kind of videos, when uh, gone into the public hands, so it's really disturbing, and it creates havoc when literally the digital literacy is lacking in the public minds. So hence deepfakes are really a threat to digital era and digital platforms, since many of the digitally illiterate people also use social media platforms. So Ministry of Electronics and IT said on Tuesday that it had sent advisory to the social media firms to comply with the Digital Media Ethics Code of 2021. The advisory is aimed to getting social media firms to crack down more forcefully on the fabricated deepfake clips of people made with artificial intelligence tool. A similar advisory was first sent to the social media platforms in early November. So, to communicate to the users, the advisory mandates the intermediaries to communicate the prohibited content, particularly those specified under Rule 3 of the IT rules. So, further, let's look at the today's editorial article. First, let's finish the smaller one. So, a case of revanchism. Courts should not stray from the constitutional vision of secularism. The judiciary should not be seen as a legitimizing recurring communally motivated attempts to change the status of places of the worship in yet another order that may end up expediting the project of converting a mosque into a temple by indirect means. The Allahabad High Court has ruled a set of suits filed in 91 for a declaration of the part of the site of the Ganwapi Mosque in Varanasi, the property of Lord Vishweshwaraya, is not barred by law. So this article revolves around the issue of the Ganwapi Masjid case, which is going on in the Allahabad court, and recently the Allahabad High Court had allowed for a detailed survey of the Ganwapi Masjid to look into the presence of a temple, which is a place of birth of a Hindu deity. So here, from the UPSC perspective, we need to think about the law places of Worship Act of 1991. So this law prohibits any of the changes done to the places of worship post 1947. It doesn't permit any kind of changes done to these places of worship post 1947. It sets a deadline of 1947 as the reference year to maintain status quo. So this law was brought in the backdrop of the Babri Masjid movement of the early 1990s. And more importantly, these kind of articles are centered around the concept of secularism. Secularism is a very key hot topic for UPSC, and we need to know the basic prospects like its definition, what is Indian secularism, and what is Western secularism, and we have the differences between the two. Both are not the same. So Indian secularism is more of a positive notion, whereas Western secularism is of a negative notion. Why? Because Indian secularism is accommodative of various religions, and it does not strictly separates does not strictly separates state and religion. Whereas in Western secularism, there is a very strict separation of religion and state. Even if the church issues any of the decree which is discriminatory in nature, the state cannot intervene in its affairs in the Western countries. However, in India, if the temple trusts makes any of the orders, or if any of the mosque trust orders any kind of discriminatory orders, the states can really intervene to make progressive corrections as per the constitutional ideals to uphold the fundamental rights. That means the fundamental right to religion is not supreme over the individual fundamental rights. So that is the true secularism spirit of India. That concept is very important in such articles. A new economics for inclusive growth. Inclusive growth, this is a key term mentioned in the UPSC syllabus, GS paper 3. Inclusive growth. It is very important. So let us look into the article. In their book Breaking the Mold, Reimagining India's Economic Future, Raghuram Rajan and Rohit Lamba recommended that India give up its policies to build its manufacturing sector and jump straight to export more high-end services. So recently a book named Breaking the Mold, Reimagining India's Economic Future was released by ex-RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan and Rohit Lamba, and they have talked about the nature of how to achieve inclusive growth in India in coming years, and they have given some suggestions with regard to that. So first recommendation is they have recommended that to give up the manufacturing sector and just jump straight towards the exports of high-end services, because India has been a superpower in exports of services rather than manufacturing sectors. We have a very good edge in services, and they have recommended that to focus a betterment of these services rather than experimenting in manufacturing sector. So this is surprising because this is what India has been trying to do it in last 30 years and with very poor outcomes. So though we have a better edge in services, we have very poor outcome when compared to other countries like China, though being a manufacturing hub, they are also very good in services. And when we compare to United States, we lack. When we compare to Europe, we lack. So insufficient jobs and incomes are the Achilles heel of the India's economy. The signs are visible outside the economist's data sets, the social and political arenas. The farmers are demanding better prices, and informal sector workers and contract workers fair wages and social security. The economy cannot be in good shape when 60% of the Indians cutting across the castes and religions are classified as economically weaker sections entitled to the job reservations. A growth affecting mismatches. The obstacle tripping India's growth is the mismatch between skills, jobs, and incomes. 20 years ago, when supposedly India was shining, economists thought India had leapfrogged manufacturing in the development ladder, in which traditionally masses first transitioned from agriculture to manufacturing and then to services. China lifted its masses from poverty, moving them up the ladder into a large manufacturing sector, becoming the factory of the world. Now, China is producing world beating technology champions. India invested in world class institutions of science and engineering 70 years ago. The Indian Institute of Technology enabled India's software industry to become a globally competitive force. They also produced CEOs for US multinational companies. India's space program is delivering results at a fraction of NASA's costs. So we know that India's cost effective space programs like Chandrayaan 1, which was almost not even 25% of what NASA had invested in. So, such kind of very low cost space programs are taken by ISRO. So, however, India's pattern of growth with investment in high end skills has not generated enough decent jobs for India's masses. Delivering the 2010 Lionel Robbins Memorial Lectures, British economists Ade Turner pointed out that too much reality was being left out of economics model for them to explain the world. With a twist of Keynes' statement that practical men are usually the slaves of some defunct economist, he warned that the great danger lies with reasonably intellectual men and women employed in the policy making departments of central banks and governments who tend to gravitate to simplified versions of the dominant beliefs of economists who are still very much alive. The realities are being missed. So the economic theory is developed by analyzing numbers, miss realities. So most economists do not understand the process of learning, which is I don't think there are much points in this article. So let's jump to the last part of it where certain recommendations will be available. So investing in education and skills for high end manufacturing and services will not benefit the masses if they cannot be employed. That means investing in education and skills for high end manufacturing and services will not benefit the masses if they cannot be employed. That means in India, the real issue is not the centric to unemployment, but the unemployability of the available labor. That means when there is a market and the labor mismatch, the laborers, though they are educated, they are not being matched with the requirement of the market. When we take the example of a graduate in India, and when we take a graduate example from United States, there is a huge gap between these two graduates. So in India, for example, nearly 60% of the output of the engineering graduates are unemployable. They are not unemployed, but they are unemployable when we take the global market. That means this owes to the low level quality, low quality education, and lack of skills. So it requires not only investment, it requires revamping of the whole education sector in India. The whole education sector needs to be revamped in order to match the global market requirements. That is what the requirement is all about. The richness of economic activity within local webs will create more sustainable growth than policies to participate in long international supply chains when barriers are rising. Indian states has limited financial capacity. It cannot afford to misspend it by reducing taxes and duties, by giving incentives to investors with the expectation that benefits will gush down to the masses. This point is indicating towards the failure of trickle down economics. Trickle down economy is nothing but it is a economic policy where the huge tax incentives and many other remissions are given to the big corporates, hoping that these big corporates in turn create more jobs by their business expansion, which leads to the mitigation of unemployment. So when this cycle is broken, instead only the tax benefits are given to the big corporates and they expand their business, but more jobs are not created in turn. So this leads to the failure of trickle down economics. So more imports will not increase the well-being of Indian citizens if they do not have the more incomes to buy. For example, we know we are the one of the largest countries in importing mobile phones also. We import Apple phones, right? When people do not have sufficient money to buy these iPhones, why do we need to import these iPhones instead when we don't have money? So that's the real question. More imports will not increase the well being of Indian citizens when we do not have more incomes to buy. So, even though if we import many of the requirements, when we do not have sufficient money to buy those imported goods, then what's the point of even importing? That the importing doesn't need to the doesn't lead to the well being of the Indian citizens, right? So, the FDI will not boost growth if it does not increase employment zone. For example, if Tesla invests in, say, Tata, if Tesla invests in Tata, both leading to making an EV which is affordable to the Indians, and if this FDI investment does not lead to a better job creation, then what is the point of even making this FDI great success? In what criteria can we call this FDI a great success if proper employment is not created from this? So there won't be any of the benefits at the ground level. Rather, it leads to the business expansion. That's all. Even if the business expanded, even if they make an EV, people won't be having proper money to buy this particular product, right? The purchasing power goes down. The mold in which the economics was cast in the later part of the 20th century must be broken. The policymakers must reimagine the pain of India's growth. They must get down to the basics of the inclusive economic growth, and there are no shortcuts. The global economy is not growing like it was when China became a factory for the world. Producers everywhere are looking for new markets. India, with its unmet needs, is very attractive to them. India's policies must take advantage of this opportunity and make more for India in India, thus growing both jobs and incomes for Indian masses. So, from this article, we can deduce that inclusive growth is not about FDI, and it is not about any of the business expansion, and it is not about the imports, and it is not about just the GDP figures. Inclusive growth does not incorporate any of these elements, except inclusive growth is nothing but the betterment of the masses. That means no one left behind. No one left behind. Sabka saath, sabka vikas. That's the real meaning of inclusive growth. Inclusive growth is not just giving tax incentives to the big corporates and waiting for job expansion. Inclusive growth are those policies where the employment expands for the Indian masses, where the money is put in the hands of the ground level, the middle class people, the lower class people. When the masses spend, when the economy of the masses, when the betterment of their economic status is bettered, that is what inclusive growth is. So today we saw about the Nicaragua flight crisis, and we talked about fiscal deficit, the trade deficit, and the CAD, and some points with regard to inclusive growth, and with regard to secularism, India Russia's bilateral ties, and social media advisory to the regulate the deepfakes. So this is all about today's current affairs on 27 December 2023. So for more content, please do subscribe to Think Like Toppers. And I'm asking that if any kind of improvement required from my side, please do let me know in the comment section, because I'm still learning to teach, since I am very eager to share my knowledge which I have gained over the years in UPSC preparations. And I gave my mains in 2023. So last time I couldn't clear my prelims, but in 2023 I went up to mains. So since I have been preparing since last 4 years, I was hopeful in sharing my knowledge. So please do subscribe, like, share if you like this video. Thank you. And let's grow as a community, as a peers, in studying together and learning from each other to make a well informed citizens of this country. Thank you.